Hi everyone and welcome to Bitdefender's webinar about fighting REvil. My name is Martin Zugec and I will be your host today. We also have a couple of very special guests from our own Bitdefender labs. We will invite them, ask them questions all related to this topic. So thank you everyone for coming today. We are going to talk about REvil, one of the most notorious ransomware gangs that disappeared from the public eye recently. And REvil is a Russian-speaking ransomware group that started their operations in 2019. The name is a short version of Ransom Evil or Ransomware Evil, and it was inspired by the gaming series Resident Evil. This group is also known as Sodinokibi, Blue Crab, or Sodin, a couple of different names, of course. The malware they developed is based on the code from another group called GenCrab, which retired at about the same time as REvil started their operations. According to an interview with one of the core members of REvil, all the founding members used to be ex-affiliates of this group. And when they announced they are shutting down the business, they decided, let's buy the code base that they have so we can start our own group. This is not uncommon. Another group, Black Matter, also did the same thing with the code from the dark side when it was closing the business. Now, if this is really true or it is just a rebranding tactic, that's as always really hard to say. Now, REvil started a shockingly successful business, claiming to earn more than $100 million in annual revenue. And this number is probably accurate based on what we know about the payments, the average payments, and the scale of their operations. Once, when they wanted to show the solvency, what one of the members did is that they deposited $1 million to one of the cybercrime forums. So they never really had problems with the cash flow. They always had a lot of money and really huge revenue. Many of their attacks and victims are notoriously famous, from attacking Acer, stealing the blueprints from Apple supplier Quanta, blackmailing the former President of the United States, Donald Trump, to more recent attacks on the meat packer JBS or Kaseya. But the scale of the operation was actually much bigger because most victims paid ransom so they could stay anonymous. And even worse, this group was attacking not only these huge companies, they were also breaching small and medium businesses as well. Now, when REvil was actually choosing the victims, what they mostly pay attention to were two different aspects. First one was industry, and they were targeting industries where the downtime is very, very costly. That's why you see manufacturing is number one. When you shut down the plants, the business is just collapsing. Second thing that they paid always attention to was the financial state of the companies. So they were very familiar with the financials and the revenue of the victims, and the ransom was calculated accordingly. That's why the ransom payments have been so huge, because they were targeting companies that could actually afford to pay them. Now, before, when we were talking about the small and medium businesses, those were mostly related to the industry, so small manufacturing companies. And what we know, according to data from US government, is that about half of these small businesses go out of business within 6 months after ransomware attack. These small companies usually don't have mature security controls, they don't have ransomware insurance, and the forced downtime for them can be completely catastrophic. Now, being resilient and being able to bounce back from an attack is always your best option, but many of these victims didn't have proper recovery plans or technologies to rely upon. And after successful attack, one of the last few options that they have left is actually to use or try to find out one of the 3 decryptors and try to restore access to their data. Now, this is the good moment to introduce my first guest today, Bogdan Botezatu, because he's really expert on these decryptors. So, Bob, if you can join us and you can tell us what you do for a living.
Hi, Marlon. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. My name is Bogdan Botezatu. I'm a director of threat research at Bitdefender, and I'm running the threat research blogs in particular. And as a secondary business, I'm helping companies and home users recover from devastating ransomware attacks. So I'm kind of at the forefront of technical support for victims.
Perfect. So can we start by, can you tell us exactly what the decryptor is and how it's actually working?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Ransomware Decryptor is a software tool that looks for encrypted files on a victim's machine and computes the decryption key in order to revert files to their original state. So presume you have been hit by ransomware, a decryptor will help you identify the infection, will generate or fetch a decryption key from a particular incident, and then starts decrypting files one by applying the reverse process of ransomware. This is kind of how decryptors offered by attackers work. Just so you know, after you are paying the ransom, an attacker will give you a custom decryption tool that only works for your ransomware attack. In contrast, the Bitdefender decryptors work for most or all of the victims that have been hit by a specific family of ransomware. You just download it, you run it, and it will defeat the encryption and restore your files to the normal state.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit, how are actually the decryptors created? Is it reverse engineering the ransomware and trying to find like the weaknesses in implementation, or are there other methods how you can develop the decryptor?
Yeah, there's plenty of methods. Sometimes cyber criminals, as you said, unwillingly introduce vulnerabilities in the encryption process. Such vulnerabilities help researchers at Bitdefender to infer decryption keys, for instance, or to recover these keys from computer memory immediately after the attack, or sometimes will also work around the encryption algorithm. But these are usually rare cases in today's mature and highly tested ecosystem of ransomware as a service offerings. Probably the most important mechanism for creating decryptors is through collaboration between Bitdefender and law enforcement agencies around the world. So successful investigations allow our law enforcement partners to get to the attacker's servers, secure these decryption keys, and these decryption keys are then used by us to create decryptors that reverse the ransomware process. And well, probably an important thing to mention also, there are also circumstances when ransomware operators decide to shut down under pressure from law enforcement. Either they have hit a big target or they just have made enough money to retire somewhere safe. So they will publish these decryption keys themselves on dedicated channels. And once we get these keys, it's just a matter of building a tool that uses them to restore files to their original state. And I know it might sound simpler than it actually is, but we have world-class cryptography specialists and reverse engineers that are extremely familiar with ransomware strains or ransomware families because they have been investigating them for so long.
Okay, so Bitdefender actually released the decryptor for REvil. Can you tell us how did you get the key for this decryptor? Like, what was the method how we could actually build it?
Yes, we had a very long research partnership with law enforcement agencies around the world. And we have spent about 6,000 working hours on this research until we were able to identify specific key points of the ransomware operation and assist the law enforcement agency into seizing the keys. More about this, I think, will be revealed by Catalin later in the webinar.
Okay. Now, something, because I'm very data driven, I always want to like understand all the data behind. Can you tell us or share some of the telemetry numbers about the decryptors? Are we talking only about like couple of the customers that use it, or is the impact of releasing the decryptors significant enough to hurt the ransomware operators? Because we know they actually have a lot of cost associated with these ransomware attacks. So that's why I'm curious, like, what's the scale?
Yeah, we finally can break some good news for a change. Over the past few years, we have released about 21 free ransomware decryptors. That's a huge number by any standards. And last year alone, about 1.3 million people across the globe have downloaded these Bitdefender decryptors. If it were for us to be more specific, the REvil decryptor that we released in September has helped about 1,400 companies in about 84 countries to decrypt about $500 million worth of data. And regarding our contribution to hurting the ransomware operations, there's a little bit more news. The decryptors that we have made available over these years have had a great contribution in the war against ransomware. As a case in point, because you mentioned GandCrab a little bit earlier, the 5 decryptors for GandCrab that we created between 2018 and 2019 have helped us disrupt their operations, have created internal struggles between ransomware operators and their affiliates, and this ultimately resulted in the dismantling of what was back then known as the world's most prolific ransomware operator of that time. So free decryptors help users get their data back without paying up. It helps us prevent cyber criminals from gaining more money on behalf of these victims. And ultimately, it also creates struggle between operators and their affiliates, and this causes distrust and ultimately demise.
Yeah, perfect. So I do have a last question. This one is practical, and like I was saying, I really care about the small customers. We all read the news about the big ones, but usually the small ones just pretty much bankrupt. Let me ask you a practical question. I'm the small business owner. My computers have been infected by ransomware. I don't have access to my data. What is the best method? How I can find out what kind of ransomware it is and if there is the decryptor available publicly?
That's a very good question, because it's something that I encounter a lot while providing support for these victims. They will either try out any decryptor that exists on available from any vendor in an attempt to get their information back. Or they will sometimes apply one decryptor to a totally different infection because they weren't able to identify it. So I would say that the best way to identify ransomware, the ransomware family that has encrypted your information, would be to write us directly at forensics@bitdefender.com. We have created a designated email address for technical support issues with the ransomware decryptors, and we are asking people to submit several encrypted files and a ransom note for us to understand what has hit them. So once we get that information, our ransomware specialist will usually take a look at the files and accurately determine the ransomware family, maybe suggest a decryptor if we have one available, and assist you in case you run into issues with the decryption process. And I would say that this is recommended not only because it saves you time as a small business owner, but also because we always flag these support requests for undecryptable families for follow-up. So if we don't have a decryptor right now, I will make a note that a specific user needs a specific decryptor, and once we release that decryptor, I will follow up with these people and let them know that there is a tool readily available. So if you don't want to write us or you want to explore further, you can use the Crypto Sheriff web application that's on the nomoreransom.org website to submit ransom notes or encrypted files, and usually the tool will let you know what decryptor might solve your issue. And one important thing here, as a rule, we always suggest that victims send small files that do not contain private information. Some good example of files that are suitable for being sent out would be like wallpaper images that were encrypted, or user manuals in common formats like PDF or document.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all this information about the decryptors. We can move to the next part of the presentation, and pretty much what we are going to discuss now is how is it possible that the REvil was able to grow up so quickly? Just like in 2 years, it went from a newcomer to like a really big threat to everyone. And to understand how this could happen, we need to look at the ransomware as a service model first. How does it work? Now, a couple of years ago, this model was very simple. What it was all about was selling subscriptions to the ransomware and infrastructure used to run the ransomware attack. So what the attacker would do is that he would pay, let's say, $40 per month, get access to the ransomware, in fact, get inside the victim's network, deploy the ransomware, and then negotiate, collect the ransom, and that's it. A very simple model, nothing special about it. But the modern ransomware as a service, the one that we are seeing today everywhere, it operates actually differently. It is more of a profit sharing scheme operation. So what I'm showing you on this model is how all these professional groups are operating. And what we have here is that we have actually the core members of the ransomware gang that are responsible for developing the malware or buying it and for running the infrastructure. They work with affiliates or with partners, and they are specialists in the penetration testing. They are responsible for getting access to the victim's network and deploying and distributing the ransomware. After this network has been infected, this is where the core team comes back and starts negotiating with the victim. The ransom is usually being paid, and then the core team is going to share some percentage of these ransom payments with those affiliates. So what's happening in this model is that we have multiple specialists. One is doing only the coding, one is doing only the penetration testing. We can also have for example, they can buy access to those companies. So what's really important here is to understand that's why we are seeing so many specialized and sophisticated attacks. Now, according to one interview, REvil had about 10 core members, and at the peak, it worked with about 60 affiliates. Now, if you have been wondering about like what's the profit sharing, 70 to 80% of the ransom is actually going to affiliates. So most of the money is paid to the partners, and the core team is keeping only about 20% of the revenue. And the reason why this model is actually favoring affiliates is very simple. There is a lot of competition between these different ransomware gangs, and everyone wants to attract the most talented affiliates. It's common for affiliate or the partner to be member of many of these gangs, so not only one of them. And the ransomware as a service groups, they also need to have some competitive differentiators. Whether it's technology, I know that REvil was, for example, very proud of encryption they've been using, or it's just the higher payments compared to other groups. So again, there is a lot of competition between these groups, and if your company got hacked into, it's probably not even the ransomware gang, it's one of the partners and affiliates. So this actually explains why we are seeing all these professional attacks and tens of millions of dollars in the ransom today, because this is like a vicious circle. You provide a code, you keep improving it, you are focused only on development. The better your code and services are, the more professional affiliates you can attract. With better affiliates come access to bigger companies, which means the ransom can go higher, you have more revenue, which you can invest into improving your services or attracting better affiliates. And what's happening with this vicious cycle is that every single attack is getting worse and worse and worse. And this is also why we are seeing the more sophisticated attacks, because these ransomware gangs can actually invest a lot of funds into running their operations. It's also very common that the members are moving from one gang to another. Often they have multiple identities. That's pretty much happening all the time. Very often they change or shut down one of these fake identities and try to create a new one. And this is a really good time to invite my second guest today, Dragos Gavrilut, and talk to Dragos about tracking and identifying these groups and individuals and how we can understand who's who and what are they doing. Dragos, thank you very much for joining us today. Can you tell us something about what you are doing for a living?
Hello, Martin, and I'm also thankful for being here. I'm the director of Cyber Threat Intelligence Lab in Bitdefender, and one of our main goals is to create protection in terms of EDR, XDR, networking, and so on. So because of this, we need to analyze every kind of this attack and tackle them from any possible angle. And as a separate notice, I'm quite passionate about compiler reverse engineering. So whenever we're talking about decryption key, understanding how a ransomware works, I'm quite interested in such a thing.
Okay, so let me start with the first question. So when you and your team are looking at identifying which operator is behind an attack, how does this attribution work? Is it based on the code similarity, or are you looking at the techniques, tactics and procedures, or how do you actually know who's responsible for the attack?
Well, very good question, Martin. So it's not that easy as it seems. So it's a fairly complex process, and it's not just one way of doing the attribution. Generally speaking, one simple way is look at the code, find similar parts of the code with other component that you already know it's part of ransomware, and associate it like this. Another one is to tackle, let's say, the psychology behind the guys that actually write the code. And usually they if you're a guy and if you're in this business, time is money, meaning that if you're requested by somebody to create a ransomware, you probably want to do this faster. Faster means reuse some of the code that you already written for something else, and this can actually help. And the third one is look at procedures, practice, the way the execution of the code looks. And Martin, if you can go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. What we actually see here is what we call an interprocedural control flow graph. Pretty much, we look at every, let's say, every sample of malware, and we look at every possible direction that they can have during the execution. And this actually allows us to create what we call a control flow graph, the way certain type of actions follow one after another. And based on this, we can create some sort of graph or fingerprinting, if you say, that reflects that something is similar to another one. And I think this graph here is very enlightening in this from this point of view, because we have, let's say, 3 clusters with let's say different campaigns from REvil. The one in red, black, and blue, around 1,000 samples, and it's samples collecting between 2019 and 2021. And if you look at all of them, the flow, the way the execution goes, is quite similar, and this is a clear indicator that it's about the same sample. Now, Martin, can you go to the next slide as well? Now, this is how the actual graph of execution looks like. It's a very minimized image, but again, if you just look at it as a picture, there are some differences, but generally speaking, it's pretty much the same thing, or they look alike. So we can do this. We can work with these kind of things to actually say that, hey, this is likely to be something like this. So that's one way of doing the attribution. Another way is look at the model of the ransomware model, and you have been talking about affiliation. Now, it's one thing to understand that the code has been written by somebody, but it's also a problem on who's the affiliation that actually use that code, and that's a different type of the attribution that we need to consider. And if we think from the customer's point of view, the one thing that the customer actually sees, the first, let's say, communication between the attacker and the customer is the ransom note. So another very interesting way of doing the attribution is actually look at the ransomware note and see some patterns. And Martin, again, if you can switch to the next slide. Okay, so in case of REvil, there is a very, let's say, predictable pattern here. So for example, most of the ransom notes start with this welcome again with the same thing. They do have this, let's say, chapters like what happened, where they kind of explain that the files are encrypted. And sometimes if you look at this, they actually use the same code. They just, change a couple of extension or hashes there. There is obviously a section where they need to explain why you need to trust them, why you need to be certain that they are going to decrypt your file. That's very important for them, because if they lose this kind of reputation, then it's very likely that people are not going to buy the decryptor that they provide, and they are going to lose a lot of money. Again, there has to be another section. It's this one, how to get access on website, where customers are explain how can they get in contact with the attacker. Usually it's using a Tor browser, but they provide two options in all of their demands. And finally, it's the key. There is always this extension name information put at the end of the ransom note, and a couple of lines with danger, and one more time where they emphasize again that don't try to change the files, don't modify them, because they're going to be lost forever, and it's in your interest to get the files back. They change the message from time to time, but the overall concept remains the same. Now, there is actually a very interesting information that can be seen here that can actually be associated with the affiliation. And Martin, if you can go to the next slide, please. So when they actually started, or during the most of the 2019, every ransom note was similar to this one, with minor changes, like a different key, a different URL where you need to connect a different extension, but most of them were similar. And that's very important, because this format kind of reflects the affiliation. Now, can you go to the next slide, please? Now, at the beginning of 2020, we actually saw the first ransom note that actually comes with the self-promotion, and it was quite interesting. So the first thing that they were actually saying that, hey, we are known as Sodinokibi ransomware. So they actually acknowledge their name, and actually prompt the user to, hey, go to this article to read about us, to understand how serious we are. And another very, let's say, interesting thing is that they actually discussed about another ransom game. They actually said that, hey, for example, Ryuk ransomware doesn't decrypt all of your data. It's close to 87%, but we do it close to 100. So there is some sort of marketing that they are actually doing, where they are trying to actually say that, hey, we are better than another ransomware gang. If you can trust us, we're going to decrypt your file. This kind of change of behavior actually consists in some of the files, not all of the ransom note, meaning that there is probably a different affiliation there that actually uses this message to be more confident to gain more money. Now, Martin, can you move to the next slide? Now, another, let's say, interesting thing that actually happened is that, in the middle of 2020, we started to see a different type of affiliation, the one that actually target companies or entities. And every message from, welcome anyone has welcome and the company name. Now, after we analyze the behavior, it looks like they are, usually find a way to enter that company, usually an RDP brute force or SSH brute force. They spend some time in that company, maybe 1 week or 2 weeks, gather some information, and then when they send the ransomware, it's specially crafted and built for that company. That particular message is designed for that company, because it's actually going to say welcome and the name of the company. Now, it's also another very important step in here. you're going to see that they are starting to say that we have already copied the files, the critical files, from your server to another one, and there is a form of extortion here. It's also very important. It says that personal data of your clients and business contacts has been extracted, and then there is an explanation related to GDPR and the fact that if you actually leak information about your customers, you risk penalties as high as 20 million or 4% of your annual revenues. This is actually designed to be more convincing and actually force the company to pay up. As legally speaking, they are the one that are responsible for their customers' data. And again, as the format, that's another, let's say, affiliation that can be seen in this matter. So
yeah, this is actually,
yeah,
I just wanted to say this is actually a really good example. These professional groups, they understand the business. They can talk about GDPR when they are on your network for some time. So, for example, they can find out if you actually have ransomware insurance and all other information. They understand, again, a lot about the revenue. So these are not amateurs. These are like this. This is a really good example of how professional they are getting.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully this will actually shed some light on how we do attribution. So it's a a set of things. It's code, it's ransom note, it's behavior. It's all of them that actually allows us to say that, hey, all of these attacks have the same group. And when I say group, it's not just the programmer, but it's also the affiliation at the back end.
Okay, so that's actually a really good point. So we've already briefly discussed that in ransomware as a service, there are like multiple layers of organization or specialists. Malware developer that can be actually just like temporarily hired to build some component. The core developers, the affiliates. Can you actually track the different roles? And for example, if affiliate is moving from one group to another, can you track like his movements or her movements?
So yes, to some degree, meaning that for example, usually every affiliate has some sort of campaign ID, and that's not in particular something related to REvil. It's specific to every ransomware. But if you can, collect that, that campaign ID, you're going to be able to identify. And they kind of need that campaign ID because they need to associate the money that they get from the user with some ID, some unique ID, so that everybody can know exactly how much money they get. So that's one way of identifying the, let's say, the affiliates. The guys that actually create the ransomware, in that case, it's more like looking at the code and see particular, pieces of code that you see in other components. It's more likely that in their case, they are going to reuse some of the components whenever they are asked to build something, even if it's for a different, ransomware group, in terms of money and providing something faster. So different methods, but it can be done.
Okay. So the next question that I have, and we see this happening all the time. So when the group goes into the hiding or they do rebrand, come back under another name or something, can you actually track them? Do you know like this group is, for example, the Gantt crab just with a new name?
Yeah. So actually, that's quite interesting. So as I previously said, we kind of do this, this monitoring in terms of looking at code, looking at ransomware. But don't think that it's just something that we do manually. It's also something that actually translates into some heuristics that we use in the backend that automatically identify something similar. So even if, in terms of presenting things, we're going to explain, like I did with the ransomware, a couple of things that are common there. There are some mechanisms at the backend. Then whenever a new ransomware appears, clustering is going to be tested, meaning we're going to try to see which is the most similar ransomware to this one in terms of code, in terms of ransomware, in terms of TTPs and so on, maybe the attack method and so on. And based on this, possible similarity measure is going to be computed. Now, if it's something very close, like it's 90-95% similar to the way another ransomware gang is doing, then it's most likely it's the same guys that came out of hiding. Otherwise, if it's something quite different, then we're going to actually look manually and determine if it's the same guys. It could be just part of those guys, but different affiliation that change some of their memo and so on.
Okay, so I do have the last question, and pretty much, let's say that all the security industry leaders and like the world governments can listen to you at this very moment. What would you say are like the biggest challenges with attribution, and how could we as a security industry improve it or move forward?
Okay, so yeah, another good question, Martin. Well, attribution is it's obviously not 100% certain. You can think about an attribution as something like let's say an unsupervised learning technique, because usually it means that we know that it's a particular person or group of person behind something, but we cannot pinpoint exactly who they are. So and things are changing, as you have said. It's not just a group that works for one particular affiliation and that's all. They are changing, they are breaking some businesses, creating new ones. This will always be a complex thing. Now, on top of this, there are a lot of, let's say, helpful tools, cracking tools that they kind of share, from some simple one to more complex one, and different ransom group tend to share the same tools for password cracking, for password dumping, and so on. And you cannot, you reach a point where you cannot say that, hey, if they use that tool, it's probably that gang. It's very unlikely, because there are several that are doing the same thing. Now, this is actually where, in terms of detection, you kind of need to have several type of machine learning, engines that can provide a different association, maybe one that you cannot see directly through an analysis. And what we have here is something from a completely different ransomware. It's about a counter ransomware, another ransomware that is present this day. And just wanted to explain something related to differences. So I just took approximately 100 samples, different samples from the last week. Now, all of these are completely different in terms of hash or in terms of control flow graph. And if you look at the graphical execution here, all of them are different. It's kind of hard to say that they all refer to the same thing. Now, this is where actually a good machine learning algorithm, a good heuristic, come in place, and adds a secondary layer of detection that's going to protect and identify this kind of changes.
Dragos, thank you very much. Anytime when I talk to you, I always learn something new. So thank you very much for this information. Attribution is really complicated. It's not an easy thing. So this was really interesting to learn a little bit of the technical background, how this is being done.
You're welcome. And I thank you for being here.
Thanks for being here. So let's move on. We are moving to the next part. So starting with the gang grab, the modern ransomware gangs are leading something that I would call Ransomware Evolution. What they do is that they are focused on the brutal efficiency and scale. They are really trying to maximize the damage they can do, and they are constantly innovating the methods and trying to find new ways how to put even more pressure on the victims. The attacks are becoming more aggressive. By now, the double extortion, so leaking the data and demanding ransom to stop, that's completely common practice. Now, for example, REvil started with a triple extortion. They were using VoIP and the phone calls. They started calling the victims' customers and business partners and reporters, informing them about the security breach. They actually started doing another extortion, quadruple extortion, launching the denial of service attacks following after these calls. And that's something that can completely cripple every company. There was an interview with one of the REvil's leaders where he started talking about the plans that they have. They wanted to do intelligence gathering on executives, so harassing them, bullying them. Pretty much what they wanted to do is completely collapse not only the company, but also the executive team of the company at the same time. For them, this was a fun exercise, but as you can imagine, extremely stressful for any company, doesn't matter the size. So the REvil seemed unstoppable by this time and getting worse and worse, at least from the outside. But inside, the REvil has actually been struggling, and it was fighting on multiple fronts, which explains why it ultimately collapsed and why it failed to bounce back afterwards. Now, everything that we are talking about, if you think about it, a lot of it is based on the reputation and trust. The reputation of the ransomware to be able to decrypt the files. But in the ransomware as a service model, the reputation and trust between the partners is extremely important. It's one thing how these ransomware groups are presented publicly in the newspapers. It's a completely different story. What is the position of them in the cybercrime ecosystem? Now, REvil over-the-top presentation alienated some of the old-school cybercriminals. There is certain code of conduct in the digital underground. Cybercriminals are financially motivated. They want to maximize the revenue, but they don't want to attract too much attention. They try to keep the low profile. They want to keep the business running. And that's exactly the opposite of what these new groups have been doing. They like to provoke, they are very loud, they are seeking attention, giving interviews to reporters and openly talking or openly bragging about the damage they caused and how much damage they can do. This actually got worse with the pandemic because many affiliates, many partners started actively attacking the healthcare and other critically important industries. For example, REvil actually stole data from 10x Genomics. It's a biotechnological company that is researching drugs to treat COVID-19. And they published sensitive information about all the employees. And there was a pushback from the cybercrime community because these companies should be whitelisted so they can focus on research. The logic is, let them focus on research so we can be over with this coronavirus. Economy can bounce back and the ransom payments can be higher than before. So again, there was a lot of pushback from other cybercrime members because they think this is damaging everyone. And as a result, the reputation of REvil suffered. In April 2020, Russian-speaking actor Viva la Muerte threatened to reveal identity of the spokesperson of REvil, known as UNKN, unknown. A month later, the group actually announced there had been a breach, but blamed it on another member of the underground. At this moment, the REvil can no longer trust the cybercrime community, which was foundation for all its operations. And the cybercrime community doesn't trust REvil. There have been quite a lot of cases where affiliates are blaming REvil that they just kept the ransom to themselves. Remember that in the shared model, it is the REvil itself that collects the payment and then is responsible for distribution. So this evil empire started collapsing under its own weight. And as a result, what happened? REvil became even more aggressive than before. They are really trying to recover their lost reputation. We've seen some of the most sophisticated attacks in 2021. And REvil was quickly becoming a threat to national security of all the Western countries. The private and public sector have joined forces to bring REvil down. And this is really good opportunity for me to invite the last guest that I'm having today, Catalin Cosoi, who was directly involved in Operation GoldDust. Catalin, can you tell us can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit what you are doing at Bitdefender?
Yeah, hello, Martin. Hello, everybody. My name is Catalin Cosoi. I run the investigation and forensics unit, which is part of the larger DRACO team. And our team was founded in 2015 with the purpose of helping law enforcement with their investigation. It's not just myself that have been involved in the operation. It's actually a larger team that have been provided help to the Operation GoldDust. And since I had to also say what I'm passionate about, obviously cybersecurity and cooking.
Okay, so we mentioned the Operation GoldDust. Can you tell us about it? Like, which organizations have been involved? What was the outcome of that operation? Tell us what it is.
Yeah, so Operation GoldDust, it's the code name for the investigation against the REvil ransomware. The investigation group, the consortium, was founded in July 2019. So immediately, or just a few months after the closure of GandCrab and the appearance or the emergence of REvil. Initially, it was just, I think, 5 countries that were joining the investigation, mostly because they were also involved in GandCrab. And since there are some code similarities between GandCrab and REvil, so it sort of made sense for the same group that investigated GandCrab to continue the investigation of REvil. And throughout these 2 years of hard work, while mapping the infrastructure, monitoring the suspects, the affiliates and the victims, more and more countries had to join this consortium because either they had affiliates in their countries or they had parts of the infrastructure, and it was required for them to help, and obviously they wanted to help. And when the investigation, well, it didn't close, the investigation is still ongoing, so we might still see arrests in the following months. Yeah, hopefully. But during the last press release, which was about, I think, 3 weeks ago regarding the latest arrests, the consortium consisted of 19 countries in total, but several more organizations actually were involved in this. Plus, on top of that, you also have to add the private partners, such as ourselves and a few significant others.
Okay, so all the news that we've seen are talking about arresting affiliates, but what about the REvil developers?
It's a bit more complicated. Also, if you look at the indictments, some of the affiliates that have been arrested, they are also assumed to have been part of the development process. Not sure exactly if they actually wrote code in terms of development or provided feedback or just helped the developers, the initial core group with developing. However, it is believed that the core, the nucleus of the REvil development team is somewhere based in Russia. And as I've seen the indictment so far, it doesn't seem to have targeted those citizens. However, us as a private sector, we do not have access to the people that are being investigated. So maybe they are investigated, maybe they know exactly who they are, but a private sector does not have access to such information. We are on the technical side, we provide technical expertise, we provide anything related to how things work, but we cannot know who is actually being investigated as a person. I mean, if I would personally know that you, Martin, you're being investigated for REvil, that wouldn't be quite fair, right? So only law enforcement can actually answer that question. Okay,
so what you are describing, the Operation GoldDust, that sounds like a really large-scale operation, public-private sectors, like dozens of countries. How does this kind of large operation even begin? Like, are there any conferences for law enforcement agencies and security companies where you can discuss these emerging threats, or how does this work?
Yes, there used to be such conferences where people were discussing such threats, and people were saying, "Look, I have a high interest in this particular crime group, or I have a victim, a very large victim that has been infected and encrypted with REvil, for instance." But during the pandemic, those conferences actually closed shop, so that's not necessarily the way to go during the pandemic times. In general, it's actually discussions that we have with our law enforcement partners or with the other private partners, because we actually, besides the marketing wars, actually on the technical side, we do cooperate with our competition. We cooperate quite a lot. Basically, for instance, in our case, for instance, it's the fact that we work closely with law enforcement, and every time we meet, we discuss like, okay, we have this on the roll already. What's the target for the next year? And they usually say, well, we have a massive increase of victims on this particular crime group, which can be ransomware, which can be drug sales, which can be hacking, which can be remote access trojans. It doesn't really matter. But if the pressure on that particular topic is rising, they have to start doing something on it. They tell us, like, we have a focus on this. We have a focus. We have dedicated people tackling with the problem. Would you like to join? And that's the moment where we look at the resources and we say, sure, yeah, let's count us in. For GandCrab on our REvil specifically, for GandCrab we started because at the moment we joined the investigation and we were somehow at the beginning of the group, of the creation of the group. GandCrab was actually having, like, let's say, from the total market share of ransomware, GandCrab was covering about 50%. So it was really hard not to gain our attention, covering such a large market share. And then we started with GandCrab in 2017, and they went completely dark in 2019, early 2019. And we had some very interesting successes there. We provided 5 decryption tools and confused the entire group, definitely provided disruption there. And it sort of made sense for us to be in the group once we started on REvil, considering our experience on REvil, on GandCrab, considering that we already had a good relationship with all law enforcement partners that were involved. So it was just completely natural for us to be in that group. There are other investigations where we're involved, not necessarily ransomware. We've been involved in dark market takedowns. We've been involved in remote access to Trojans investigations. Some of them are still ongoing, some of them are closed, but they usually start the same way I described. And also we have 2 dedicated lines. We have forensics at bitdefender.com and Draco at bitdefender.com. So basically, if there are law enforcement out there that require our expertise, our know-how regarding on technical aspects on their investigations, they can just reach out. I'm personally looking at those email addresses, not just myself, an entire team. So if we can help, we will help.
Okay, so let's say that all these world leaders and security companies and everyone is listening to you, and forget about the reality of the things. Like, if I would ask you, what do you think is the best approach to break down this emerging ransomware gangs, what would be your recommendation? What can we do better?
In all the investigations that we've been part of, the most important aspect was a strong cooperation between public and private. For instance, from our view, if we be the only ones fighting this thing, obviously our bread and butter is security products, so we'll definitely create products that defend against these attacks. Then we will look at various ways to create decryption tools so we can help our victims. And third, we can start doing attribution. We can do that through all the techniques that Dragos earlier presented. We can sprinkle open source intelligence on top of that, and maybe in some cases we can actually pinpoint exactly the attackers. It's that guy from Russia, the other guy from Ukraine, that guy from Germany. Doesn't really matter. But with that information alone is useless. So it doesn't really. Who would be happy, or who would I help if I know exactly who did it, if I cannot act on it? So that information has to start to be provided to a law enforcement, to a group of law enforcement, international, because nowadays in cybercrime, there's never a single country. There's a group, various countries, usually various continents, obviously. So law enforcement can take that information, if they don't already have it on their own, and start actually do classical police work, wiretapping, following the people, getting approvals from the prosecutors, subpoenas, and validating all that information, and maybe adding on top of it and doing the arrest. And that's the moment you can say you actually did something on the case. So that's what world leaders should look at. And also, maybe this sort of PPP, public-private partnerships, can get a little more help from the prosecution side, from the law itself, because usually the cooperation is mostly unidirectional. We provide data to law enforcement, and they have to, unfortunately, go by the book. So this means that they have to do all these requests, international requests, that have to be approved by the prosecutors, and they really slow the process down. In cybercrime, things happen that fast. If you wait weeks or months for approvals, for signatures, for paperwork, the criminal can easily walk away. If you do mistakes, procedural mistakes, if you hurry too much, obviously the criminal walks away again. So some more attention into making this process easier, especially when it comes to PPP and international cooperation, I think that would really increase the success rate of such investigations.
Catalin, thank you very much. This was always, again, like every single speaker that I had today, I always learned something new when I talk to them. So thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So as Catalin was actually saying, that cybersecurity, it is really a team sport, and the collaboration between the public and private sector is critical to get this ransomware pandemic under control. Now, recently, even the US military started taking a more proactive role in fighting against this ransomware group, as stated by General Paul Nakasone, the head of US Cyber Command. So are these modern ransomware gangs just a temporary threat, or are they going to stay and even expand their operations? We really don't know, because a lot of it depends on the ability of security industry and governments to work together and collaborate. So I hope that this webinar was as interesting for you as it was really exciting research for us, and you will join us again in the future. I would like to thank again all our experts for sharing their insights and expertise, and let us know what you think. Stay safe.